U.S. Station 31. You read me? Found something in the ice. We need some help down here. Can anybody hear me? We found something. We found something. We found something.
12 men have just discovered something. For 100,000 years, it was buried in the snow and ice. Now it has found a place to live, inside, where no one can see it, or hear it, or feel it.
I know I'm human. Some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to, but it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
You guys gonna listen to Gary? He can be one of those things!
All right. Hello, everyone. We're here to talk about a very special film from 1982. Let's introduce the guest first. We have Michele Kisner, who does essays and commentaries. How's it going, Michele?
It's going good.
And we also have Troy Howarth, who's done several commentaries on dozens of movies. And he's also written the book on John Carpenter, The Nonconformist Cinema of John Carpenter. How's it going, Troy?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So if you guys haven't figured out, we're going to talk about the 1982 classic horror sci-fi film, The Thing, directed by John Carpenter. Now, this is based off the same source material, the 1951 movie, A Thing from Another World, which kind of was headlined by Howard Hawks. He didn't actually direct it, but yeah, it's based on a 1938 story by John Campbell, Who Goes There? Really cool sci-fi story. And this is not exactly like The Thing from Another World, fits more with the original story. So the production of this one goes further back, much further back than the 80s, actually. It starts in the 70s, and I guess we can just hop into it and start talking about some of the people who got the wheels rolling on this one from very early start.
Yeah.
Anybody want to hop in?
Sure. I mean, I guess you could say that the guy who really got the ball rolling with this film is Stuart Cohen, who was a classmate of John Carpenter's at USC. He, all the way back in 1975, was really eager to do a new version of The Thing. Now, again, it's often referred to as a remake, and we'll get into semantics and everything, and I guess everybody has their own definition, but doesn't meet my definition of a remake anyway. It's a fresh adaptation of the original source material, so it's very, very different from the movie from the 1950s, down to a whole variety of different things. They both kind of reflect paranoid attitudes of their own respective eras. The 1950s is a very Cold War kind of thing going on to it, as do a lot of sci-fi films in that period. But obviously by the time that they were looking to do this new version, technology had advanced, censorship had relaxed, so it was possible to do something a little bit closer to what Campbell had written back in 1938. So right in 1975, Stuart Cohen comes up with this idea, let's do a new version of The Thing, takes it to producer David Foster, who had set up a deal with Universal. So they were kind of off and running, started talking about the possibility of doing a new version of this thing. But John Carpenter at that point was indeed mentioned as the director that Stuart Cohen would like to have, but he was nobody in 1975. He was working on Assault on Precinct 13. Halloween was still several years away, so he was an untested, untried property. So it was very much a situation where Universal was controlling the money, the purse strings, and they said, no, we can't be having this guy. We don't know anything about him. So Tobe Hooper was the first guy that was attached to this. He kind of got lucked into a contract at Universal, thanks very much to William Friedkin, who was a big fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, helped set him up at Universal. He didn't end up doing much at Universal, actually. He spent his spinned his wheels there for a long time. Did end up making the Funhouse. They did a version of The Thing, a screenplay for The Thing that nobody liked, basically, and it was ultimately rejected. John Landis was actually approached right around the time he was gearing up to do Animal House, and he thought, no, I don't think this is right for me, so he passed on it. And it just kind of went through a whole variety of different writers. William F. Nolan was involved at one point. He was at least approached. Nigel Neal was considered, although I don't think he was ever actually formally approached. And then it pretty much kind of got to a place where it looked like it might not happen until Alien came out in '79. Then all of a sudden, that kind of film was very popular again, so the thing became re-energized, and that's when John Carpenter was formally brought into the project. By February of 1980, it was already being reported in the press that he was on his way to making a big studio movie, which was going to be The Thing. So yeah, within the space of a few short years, he had gone from nobody to becoming, pretty big deal with his name above the title and everything else.
Also, big step up for John Carpenter at this time. He was incredibly busy. If you listen to any of the stuff about that, Stuart Cohen goes over a bunch of stuff that Carpenter was incredibly busy with. Halloween 2 still, Escape from New York. He was working on Firestarter. So just imagine the amounts of stress that he had on this movie. And it was also Stuart Cohen who brought in Bill Lancaster, son of Burt Lancaster, who had written Bad News Bears. And I think that the camaraderie among the guys and the dialogue and stuff is perfect. I found it really interesting that they were talking about using stock company and a lot of the background of, Carpenter's stock company. And I can, as much as I liked a lot of those guys and a lot of my love, I cannot really picture Charles Cypher stepping into the role of Norris. Because, just those small character actors. The Thing, I think a huge part of his success, besides Carpenter, Rob Bottin, and everything about it almost, is the cast. And I think the performances from all 12 of the key players, the more I watch it, the harder it is to pick some of my side favorites. They just all are great in their own unique ways, even the smaller roles. But the production was kind of wild. If you listen to the stories, there's endless amounts of stories on here. And a lot of them do come from Stuart Cohen and other people, because Carpenter, he's a little tight-lipped sometimes, He doesn't go into depth of things. And I found it the most funny listening to him talk on the commentaries. Kurt Russell would fill in a lot, and Carpenter, that's right. That's right. And Stuart Cohen would use the same phrase in his commentaries. You could tell they're definitely a kindred. He also mentions talking to Dan O'Bannon, being familiar with the short story before Carpenter, and they obviously must have had some sort of falling out. I don't know the details on that, but if you look at their trajectory with a lot of the science fiction elements they had in their films, they definitely are cut from the same cloth. Does anybody want to mention anything else before we kind of move along?
I just found it interesting how grueling it was for them to shoot in Alaska. That was I watched the behind the scenes on the Arrow release, and they talked about how brutal it was just shooting out in that weather. And a story I did think was funny was that when they first got there, they had to wear these ginormous winter coats and pull the hoods up in front of their faces, and nobody knew who anybody was. So eventually they had to just write everybody's names on a piece of tape and then tape it to their back so that they could tell who the actors were and who the crew were. And Keith David talks about how they had a set back where they were filming in the regular states, and then they rebuilt it kind of like in Alaska so that they could shoot the inside and outside scenes over there. And he was amazed how they looked exactly identical. He was incredulous on how much they could replicate it, going from the regular states back over to Alaska. And, I can't even imagine how hard it would be to be just filming in that snow. And they said they had to drive an hour and a half back, just to get back to where they were kind of resting and camping, from the actual set. And it's just I think it probably adds a little to just how ragged everybody looks in the film, and they kind of look tired and pale, especially Kurt Russell. I'm sure there's a little makeup and stuff involved making him look kind of pale, like they've not seen the sun in a long time, but he especially just looks like he's been out in the wilderness out in the tundra for, days and weeks. So I think it just added a lot to the atmosphere of the film.
Yeah, I mean, they were living it in a way. The locations in I think it was Stewart, British Columbia, specifically where they were at, was very rough. It was a rough town as well. They tell a story. I think it was Keith David told the story about when they went on, after a long day's filming, they decided to hit the bar in town, and they weren't used to people who looked like Keith David in this community. So there was a little bit of tension in the air about that, but apparently everything ended up all right. And, generally speaking, they formed a very happy and harmonious group of people. I mean, one of the things that's unusual about this movie, it was something that Carpenter was very keen to do, is it's a man-dominated film. He didn't want to have the love interest. He didn't want to have the kind of thing that was in the 1951 version, where there was always this feeling back in the day that, well, we have to have the love story. Back in the 50s, they weren't forward thinking enough to realize that, okay, it's okay to just have a good, strong female character involved. There's nothing wrong with that, but they always had to be the arbitrary love story. The woman would somehow end up becoming menaced by the monster, and the guy had to come in and protect her and all this sort of stuff. So by 1981, when they're making this movie, things have changed, and Carpenter really wanted to kind of focus the story and not have that distraction, that added kind of external element that would kind of dilute the impact, perhaps. But one of the things, too, to your point about how brutal the conditions were, Carpenter later revealed he ended up with skin cancer as a result of making this film, because being out on location, because it was so often it was overcast, he didn't realize that going around without a hat on, you were still getting hit with the rays of the sun. And there's been a lot of jokes about how rough the man looks, and there's no question he looks a lot older than what he is. Part of that's down to the fact that he was a chronic workaholic for many, many years. I mean, the man did not stop. Smoked like a chimney too, which doesn't help. But also ending up with skin cancer, I think, didn't help him either. So he really suffered for his art on this film. Everybody did. Again, you were talking about the bus trip they would have to take. There was a great story that one of the actors tells. It may have been Keith David, because he tells so many wonderful stories that they were. Was it Joel Polis? Yeah, they were going on location, and they nearly died in that bus, because the road was also being used by sort of truckers speeding back and forth, doing their load. And so it was a really rough and tumble terrain. I mean, the whole thing wasn't shot on location, of course, but that chunk of time that they were out there in December of 1981, when they finally finished wrapping the sort of live portion of the movie, it was really brutal.
Some of the other funny stories you mentioned about getting drunk, they talk about the story of leaving somebody at the door of Carpenter at 3:00 in the morning, Kurt Russell and Tom Waits, and it was Keith David, because he was so big. They bring him back from the bar when he get drunk, and they just threw him there. And they said Carpenter lost his shit. There's a lot of funny behind the scenes where these guys didn't realize they were mic'd, and David Clennon and Tom Waits tell a story, or Tom Waits tells it, where then one of their scenes got cut, and they start bitching to each other, that fucking, under their breath, and then John Carpenter appears around, and he says, I heard everything you guys said, and they're just like, and Keith David tells a similar story where they're bitching, him and Kurt Russell and Clement, and then he just screams at him. He said he never screamed. The only time he ever screamed is that one time, and they kind of just shut up. So it's the first time he had major tensions with a cast in a movie. And I don't want to say it, there are a lot of professional actors in here, and actors can be prima donnas. So Kurt Russell really helped move them guys along.
Well, I mean, the casting is just fascinating. You already alluded to the fact that originally Carpenter kind of wanted to go with his comfort zone. And so he wanted to have people he did originally want Kurt Russell. The studio didn't want him. He wasn't regarded as a big enough actor. Escape from New York hadn't come out yet. So he was still seen as Mr. Clean-cut Disney kid, so that was, even getting him into Escape from New York was difficult, because he wasn't, he didn't have that image. It's very difficult to get studios to think outside the box and cast people, against their typical image. So Kurt Russell, they weren't keen on. They wanted John Travolta. Can you imagine that? They wanted John Travolta for that, for a period of time. And then there was all these other actors that they were trying to push on him. Some of them could have been really interesting. Jeff Bridges, Peter Coyote, Kevin Kline. They were really keen on the idea of Kevin Kline doing it. But ultimately, he came back to Kurt Russell. I mean, all the other actors, Blair, he originally wanted Donald Pleasance. That very nearly did happen. I love Donald Pleasance, but I have to say I'm kind of glad it didn't happen because I think that would have spoiled it a little bit. Because you expect Donald Pleasance to be up to no good. You mentioned Charles Cyphers. Charles Cyphers, either for Norris or for Clark, was also very heavily considered. Lee Van Cleef, he originally thought of as Gary. Isaac Hayes, he thought of for Child. So he was kind of trying to pull from his usual category of actors he had worked with. And it was Stuart Cohen who kind of said, you got a little bit more money this time. Why don't you try working with some different people? And he ended up, I think, with one of the most perfect ensemble casts. I mean, nobody phones this in. There's not one single role that I look at in this movie and say, oh, if only this had worked out differently. Everybody's perfect.
I do think that Blair in here, if we would have went with Donald Pleasance, if you read Who Goes There, the story, Blair in the very beginning, he's more of a sheepish character in the book, and he completely loses it. Not in that he's more like, we're going crazy like that, and that Donald Pleasance would have been perfect for that. But putting Wilford Brimley in there, you got some meat on those bones. He's kind of a big boy, and he's got an intimidation quality about him, which is very strange because he's kind of grandfatherly at the same time. He doesn't seem too fond of this movie, but he kind of warmed up a bit towards the end of his life. I think he was just confused by it in general, wasn't very happy with how it was made, and he was promised an equal part, I imagine, somewhat, and later on they kind of gave more of that to Russell when they reworked it, which Carpenter also did on The Fog, which, I never really noticed this movie being reworked until hearing all those stories, and then you can see things like, oh, this is so reworked, but still great, but still reworked movie.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it interesting. I was looking into Roger Ebert, famously didn't like it. And I just think about, as a working critic now, I'm like, man, what movies am I fucking up my review of that people 40 years later are going to be like, wow, that Michele Kisner, she sure didn't know what the hell she was looking at. And the funny thing is, about his review is he's just, I think he, first off, he's not a big horror guy. He just wasn't his jam. He liked some of them, but he was very much, especially if it was, any kind of genre horror or, gory, he just, wasn't into that. But the things he complains about just seem like he just didn't get it. He was not, it's that scene, Back to the Future, your kids are going to love it. That's exactly what happened to him with this movie. And I feel like a lot of people weren't ready for how gruesome and gory it was, because even today you can show somebody the thing that hasn't seen it and they're like, wow, that's really gross, and it's too intense for some people even still now, and it's it came out in 1982. So I just love reading the old reviews of people that were just really, they kind of confused being grossed out for it being bad. They don't know how to separate a movie, the quality of a movie by the material it's presenting, right? They just can't divorce the two things. But rewatching it, it just stands out to me so much how it's basically a perfect movie. And I don't say that about very many films, but I feel like every single aspect of it is firing on all cylinders. The pacing's perfect. The writing's perfect. Every single actor is giving 100%. I think these are the best practical effects that have ever been done in a movie ever. They look incredible. Even when you upscale them or you're looking at higher resolution versions, it still looks good. Absolutely every single aspect, the music, the atmosphere, just every single thing about it is absolutely perfection. And I just don't know how somebody could have watched that and think it was bad. I could see maybe think it's not my jam, but bad. I just don't get how somebody could come to this conclusion about this film.
I mean, it was not well received, as we know, in 1982 for the most part, but it was interesting. Siskel and Ebert, they had their famous review show, and Siskel was one of the few mainstream American critics who stood up for the film. As a matter of fact, he was a big Carpenter fan in general. I mean, even as late as a film like Vampires, I mean, he was, that made his top films of the year list, which was kind of unusual for a film like that. Ebert definitely liked Carpenter based on certain films. He loved Halloween, but there were other ones that he wasn't fond of. They both didn't like The Fog. Siskel liked Escape from New York. Ebert didn't. So, I mean, it's just kind of all over the place. I mean, I have a lot of respect for Ebert because he was a man who knew about film and he knew how to write about film, which is very, there are a lot of people, as we know, who everybody has a platform these days, and it's very easy to kind of get your point of view out there. But there are very few people who actually know how to write coherently and insightfully about film, and who really seem to have an understanding and to be able to make those kinds of nuances, which you're talking about, to be able to say, this isn't for me, but that doesn't mean it's bad. That is a big thing that's missing for a lot of people, because usually everybody goes for the hot take, everybody goes for the, and also it's not usually as cut and dry as, I can't think of a single film that I think is completely bad. I can't think of, there's something, whether it's a performance, it's a shot, it's a scene, there's something. I mean, there are a lot of films I don't like. I'm not, Pollyanna and just love everything. Not at all. Last year, Megalopolis came out, and it was like, this reaction to the film was so extraordinary. And there were people who were like, this is a masterpiece. And there were other people who were like, this is the worst piece of shit I've ever seen. And I remember I talked to my best friend about it. I said, I went to see it. And he said, what did you think? And I said, ask me if it was good or bad. He said, was it good or bad? And I said, yes. It's both. It's both. So it is possible for things to be anything. But I agree with you 100%. I think not only is this one of those films that I would say is like a perfect film in the sense I have no real criticism of it. I think it's Carpenter's best film. I know he feels the same way. But it is one of those movies that, I try as I might. Yeah, you can see how he rejigged certain things and he changed certain things and he was making stuff up on the fly. And yes, that pissed off some of the actors because it was supposed to be an ensemble piece. McCready was supposed to be just one of the guys, and it became more the Kurt Russell show. But it's fine. Everything in it works. Every choice seems to me to be the correct choice. Rosemary's Baby is like that.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain other films I can point to where it's like every single choice was correct.
We bring up that line about what you could tell is a good movie or not, and there's the classic definition by Howard Hawks: 3 great scenes, no bad scenes. And people would argue that there's more better scenes than 3 in here, but there is 3 of the best scenes of all time: the dog kennel, the Norris defibrillator, and the blood test. Those are 3 of the all-time best scenes, and not just because of generic, the gore and the special effects, the suspense in those scenes, the dialogue in the scenes, the way they're delivered. Just for example, you could take any moment from this movie. Richard Masur, when he delivers that line, whatever it is, it's weird and pissed off. He could have delivered that so hammy, so over the top. Everybody in here somehow, from the "you gotta be fucking kidding me" line, it's grounded, and it's so wonderful because these guys are so good, and I can't imagine other people in these roles. As much as I like a lot of the other guys, I just can't do it. They couldn't do it. These other guys are so professional. They take their craft serious, and they think their job serious, but they don't look at the thing as like the horror movie cred nerd stuff that a lot of other people that were involved would.
Yeah. No, it was funny because there were a few of the actors on the film, I think Kurt Russell and Keith David and maybe 1 or 2 other actors who were kind of into this sort of thing. And so that aspect was fun for them, whereas you had somebody like Wilford Brimley who was just kind of like, what is this shit? Probably it was just not his thing, although he was just a curmudgeon, it was fine.
Curmudgeon.
Oh my God, but there is a hysterical interview with him. I think it might be on the Arrow release where they're talking about, I think it said something about Charles Norris, and he just says, he's dead. I lost my shit when he said that, just the way he said that. I thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And you could tell he was just a curmudgeon. He was an older guy. Although I think he was actually younger in that film than I am now, which kind of blows my mind. I hope I look better than that. But
I think he was 48 years old or something like that.
Was he 48? 48. Like yeah, 48.
34. 34 years old. 1934, yeah.
It's actually go ahead, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just you can tell there was that difference in his attitude, but it doesn't affect his acting. I mean, he gives a fantastic performance, and all these other actors that are mentioned, like, I love all those guys, but I don't think any of them could have done it any better.
I was just gonna say there's like a phenomenon I've been noticing as I'm like in my 40s, where when I was a kid, so I saw The Thing as a kid for the first time. And I swear these guys are like 50 in this movie. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like in my 40s. Now I look them up and they're like 38, like 42. And I'm like, man, I thought they were so old. And now I'm like the age they were when they were in it. And I'm like, oh, maybe it's not that old, But I like kind of that it was like, you know, the 80s were a time where they were kind of refreshing a lot of 50s sci-fi movies. Like The Fly is another good example of where they take a movie that kind of had hokey special effects. I wouldn't say bad, but just what they were using, what they had available to them at the time. So they were, you know, just not as advanced. And then they just take them to like next level body horror gore. And it's, you know, I feel like it's just interesting that the 80s was like this time of doing that, like taking these 50s ideals and like kind of like deconstructing them and putting them back together and extrapolating on them and just making them more intense. The 80s were all about excess, right? So of course, if you're going to reinterpret something from the 50s, you're going to intensify it, but it still keeps the themes of the 50s movies, which is like paranoia, right? And like it kind of, I feel like, I don't know, I'm sorry if I'm getting into thematic thing, it's like off topic or whatever to what we're talking about now, but I just find it interesting that the themes of the thing fits every decade, even afterwards, because there's always some sort of like paranoia going on in politics and in society. So, you know, in the 50s, you got communism, Red Scare stuff. And then the 80s, you got Cold War, Russians, all that kind of thing. And we have the same, I mean, people are still talking about the Russians now. It's 2025. There's still all that kind of stuff going on. And it's just basically the fear of the unknown and the fear of the other. That's like a universal theme that's going to continue as long as there's people around. And I like, Troy, earlier you were talking about how like it's all men in this film. And I think it's a really interesting dynamic, seeing how men deal with stressful situations like that and how women would deal with it. And I'm not even talking about like men and women mixed together, like just men separate, women separate, because men, it's just more testosterone driven, like survival of the fittest. They start, who's the alpha, who's the, you know, like who's the top guy, who's the strongest guy, he's going to survive. We'll all like coalesce around this strong guy, like he's the leader of a pack. That's like a male kind of trait. Women, we'd be in the back discussing, okay, well, we'll sneak in the back and we'll like sit around talk about our feelings about who do you think's the thing, you know, like but men are so scared of, because of society, expressing emotions that when a lot of the tells in the thing are men that are expressing emotions or acting differently or acting outside of the norm of how men are or society wants men to act. I totally noticed this when I was watching it this time. I'm like, wow, it's like kind of like a microcosm of like all these male problems, like, you know, put into like this really tight bottle situation where they have to confront each other's fears. And also I like that, you know, some of these men had already had kind of issues with the other men even before it happened. And then when the thing comes around, they kind of use it as an excuse to vent and like get out these frustrations they've had with other men and like kind of pin it on them being the thing so that they can destroy them, you know, like it just like it's like a basically like they throw like a fire, you know, it like lights explosion of like all these male emotions, which I'm not a man, so I don't know the intricacies of that, but
you know, I think there's an argument to be made that one of the biggest male fears is talking about our feelings, specifically talking with other men about our feelings, because it's not seen as a manly thing. You know, boys don't cry and real men don't cry and all that sort of thing. So it deals with that in an interesting sort of way. I mean, in the 50s film, you have this distrust of science. You know, the character of the scientist, I think his name is Carrington, who's given this vaguely Russian look. He's got the sort of Van Dyke beard. He wears the furry hat at different points in the film. So he's, you know, he's not Russian, but, you know, audiences in 1951 would have looked at him and said, oh yeah, he looks fishy. He looks like he could be one of those commie red guys. So that's very much what that's about. This film in the 80s, of course, you know, we're dealing with the Reagan era and everything, and that's something that Carpenter is going to be addressing very heavily in his films. He's not always referred to as a political filmmaker, but he is 100%, and he's a very leftist filmmaker, which is interesting because he had such a good, strong friendship with Kurt Russell, who's not. And, you know, this was something I talked about with Carpenter when I interviewed him for my book was, you know, he's worked with some famously outspoken right-wing actors. You know, I wouldn't describe Kurt Russell as a rabidly right-wing guy, but he's worked with James Woods. He's worked with Charlton Heston. And I asked him about that, and he said it's like Thanksgiving dinner. You just don't talk about it. It's fine. You know, they're professional. They know what they're doing. I had no problems with them whatsoever. So if you're able to, kind of turn that part off and just learn how to work together, which so much of the thing is about the idea of men learning to work together. So many of the problems in this film could have been avoided by the idea that somebody would have just been like, guys, can we just sit around and talk about this thing openly instead of everybody just getting paranoid, holding up in their rooms, not wanting to talk to each other, getting more and more surly, drinking, all these things that happen, which, the lack of a female presence in the film, I mean, unless we want to count the computer voice, which is Adrienne Barbeau, by the way, you have a deleted scene which addresses something that's not talked about in the film, which is the kind of sexual needs of the men, because McCready has a blow-up sex doll. We don't see it in the film as it is now, but that was something that was originally shot, and there are stills of it.
Do want to
go ahead. Oh, sorry. I was just going to, in the beginning, you were saying, the chess game is a female voice. And I find it interesting because he essentially shuts her up when she wins. And I kind of think that's also a little bit indicative of like his approach to everything in the film, which is burn it all down. Yeah. He plays like a zero-sum game, right? Mm-hmm. Like every action he takes. And I just kind of found it was interesting how the beginning of the movie mirrors the ending. It's kind of like him saying, she says checkmate, so he blows it up, and then the thing has him in checkmate at the end, essentially. So he just burns the entire facility down, and now they have no way to escape, right?
Which is the end of Escape from New York as well.
Yeah.
We're just going to blow it all up. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a constant too.
He also threatens to blow it up earlier when they lock him out, and he comes, I'll blow the whole thing up. There's a couple things I want to touch on. So Carpenter definitely is a leftist, but he has a lot of right-wing, like he loves Howard Hawks, he loves John Ford, he loves John Wayne. And for us, I do think that Kurt Russell, although whatever politics aside, Kurt Russell, you can tell, is a very jolly, friendly, lovable guy. I think he's our generation's John Wayne. And I think that he channeled a lot of Clint Eastwood and John Wayne through his movies. And I think that I directly connected with him growing up. And I think that my entire family was always loved Kurt Russell. Probably very tight race. Probably my favorite actor. Overall, I just can't dislike Kurt Russell. I just love the guy to death no matter what. And when push comes to shove, sometimes it's just he's a good-natured human being, and he comes across that way. But I do think that he is that John Wayne type for John Carpenter. And also we talk about the kind of the 50s being repeated into the 80s, and that was definitely started in the 70s, of course. I mean, Horror Express was 72, but that's a little bit different kind of element. Very much off Who Goes There, for sure. Same story, really. Excellent story. Mm-hmm. Movie, but we kind of go and we sit Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 78, Philip Kaufman, a repeat, and then we have Alien, and then by the early 80s it is a heyday of it, The Thing, Extra. We have this big 50s inspired movies, and Corman caught the pulse. He's always early, so Battle Beyond the Stars, Galaxy of Terror, Forbidden World, the nonstop Android with the sci-fi stuff, but it's a creation. And this movie is riddled with character actors, which is my favorite thing in movies. If you look at all man cast movies like Platoon, there's a scene where you see how they all hang out, how they're separated. And in this movie, there's a brief scene where you see Richard Dysart and Wilford Brimley playing ping pong, and you see Clark playing pool, and you see them all kind of isolated in their groups. You got Gary and Peter Maloney, and I think Charles Hallahan playing cards. You can tell who is friends, who is not friends, who is isolated, who's a loner. Just by that one little scene. You show, you don't tell, and I don't think people give enough credit. I think this movie is so focused on, look at the gore effects, and that's amazing, but there's so much more to this movie.
I think one of the most genuinely touching moments in the film, and I do think the movie has a heart to it, which is sometimes people don't. I mean, there were so many criticisms at the time. Oh, everybody's dressed like, you can't tell who's who. Well, that's kind of the point in a way, but at the same time, they all have separate and distinct personalities. So it's like, you're not really paying attention. But there's a lovely moment where McCready is kind of taking charge, and Gary comes up to him, and he's obviously distraught. And he says, but I know him. He's my friend. And that is such, to me, every time I see that, it always kind of tugs at my heartstrings a little bit. There's that sense of a real friendship that goes on there that's very real. And again, everybody has their own kind of defining characteristic. I think an aspect that I didn't notice for years and years, because it's just there. They don't make a big deal about it. And it was hard to see on home video for many years, is the fact that Richard Dysart has a nose ring, What an
Yes,
interesting
I noticed
touch.
that for the first time watching this.
Yeah.
I don't know why I never saw it before. It's also because like I have a nose ring too, but his is like kind of like in a weird spot, like physically, like it's kind of more far back where the crease of his nose is. I literally have never seen somebody have a nose ring there. I think people didn't wear nose rings a lot, so they just kind of threw it there because that's not where most people get it pierced.
No.
But yeah, I just noticed that. I was like, he has a nose ring. Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a middle-aged guy. I don't think, obviously, he didn't have his nose pierced in real life.
Yeah.
I would be shocked if he really did. So it was just something, it was just a little character flourish. It's a nice, but everybody's got that. Everybody's got their little sort of thing, you know, or so to speak. Everybody has their own defining characteristic. And so this idea that, oh, the characters are unlikable and they're all interchangeable and they're all just ciphers, I don't agree with that at all.
I disagree. And I want to talk about Richard Dysart because I think he's the most underrated character. He has one of the best lines that's not really talked about. Is that a man or something? When they see that, so haunting and delivery. And I feel bad for Copper because Copper gets kind of SOL.
Oh,
he was somebody that if he would have lived longer, he could have helped immensely. And I think the things would have changed. I think he would have came up with a better idea. Blair too, of course. Those two are and Fuchs. So those three guys gone in the beginning, kind of SOL because they're the smart guys. Those are your intelligent, thinking people that act and think and things like that. But no, I just a lot of a love for Richard Dysart in general. Great character actor. He pops up in a couple of horror-oriented films. I think people will be interested in. The Prophecy and Warning Sign are two good ones. The Warning Sign, he goes nuts, but he's really good in that.
Well, it's fun to see him with David Clennon in this, who plays Palmer, because they had just both been in Being There, the Hal Ashby film, which is one of my favorite movies, a great film with Peter Sellers. So it's fun to see them reunited. I mean, I'm sure quite coincidentally, but that's what I was saying before. Everybody makes the most of what they've got. I mean, I think you see a lot of films that have, I wouldn't describe this as an all-star cast. Apart from Kurt Russell, I wouldn't say any of these people are really stars, but they're known actors. They're very well respected, recognizable actors at differing stages in their career. Keith David is his first movie. Other people have been around for a while and have been working, in some cases for decades. But everybody has their moment to shine, and everybody has an opportunity to create a character. You see so many of these kind of all-star disaster films and World War II movies that were very popular in the 70s in particular. I just recently rewatched The Towering Inferno, for example, which is such a strange film when you break it down and think about it. It's like the whole thing is predicated on the idea of seeing all these beautiful people dying horribly. It's kind of an upscale slasher in a way when you think of it that way. Nobody's got anything to do. It's like, well, William Holden's over here looking dashing, but you're not giving him anything to do. All of these actors are given something to do, and I think that's what makes this special.
If you have something to say, Michelle.
Oh, I was just like, you brought up Dr. Copper. I love the scene where he has the computer kind of calculate what's going to happen if the thing gets out into the general, world population, and he just starts freaking out because he realizes that they're like fucked, essentially. So he just kind of has a mental breakdown of trying to internalize the feeling of humanity, like kind of being over, and he's smashing everything. He's going crazy. I just love that scene. Like, it's so apocalyptic and, nihilistic, and usually like in a movie, like in a lesser film, the scientists will run the numbers, and then he'll be like, oh my God, 96% something will happen in 72 hours. And then he's like, I better come up with a plan. Not this guy. This guy's like, shit, we're fucked, man. What are we going to do? And he's just breaking everything. I feel like that's a really human reaction to that kind of news. Like, he just is immediately we're doomed. And when you think about it, even with the end of the film, it's a possibility they still are doomed. Maybe one of them is the thing, right? So you don't know, essentially. Well, they are fucked in reality.
Yeah, that's all played on Wilford Brimley's face. It's all internal. It's reading. It's what's going on behind his eyes. That's very tough for actors to do, I think. It's not the kind of thing that always gets attention. People very often undervalue silent acting. Sometimes actors who play characters without any dialogue, they think, well, that's easy. You don't have to learn any lines. There's so much more that's involved in that. Boris Karloff as the Frankenstein monster is still one of the great performances of all time, even though he doesn't say a word in the original film. He doesn't have to. Christopher Lee in The Curse of Frankenstein, the same thing. It's an extraordinary performance, physical, and in terms of what you're doing with your body, in terms of what you're able to convey. That's not always properly appreciated. So that scene with him doing the calculations, and it's all just registering across his face like, oh man. And he, the bottle of booze is there, which is not good. Then he pulls open the drawer and the gun is there. We know things are not going to go well.
Yeah.
That was actually cut down from a longer scene and put in a weird spot. Listening to the Stuart Cohen commentary, and also reading the book suggests that Blair's already a thing by that point. But with that addition to the scene, it had to happen right after the computer scene. It had to. It just had to. Speaking of actors who don't talk, Steve McQueen was infamous for cutting as many lines as he could because he realized, and John Wayne, Eastwood. Yeah, these three guys are three of the best. Bronson, they don't cut their lines. I mean, I don't think Bronson, as much as Bronson one of the time favorites, I don't think he's as strong of an actor as some of those other guys. But I'm saying that they're some of my favorites, and they cut their lines because they realize the power of silence. The Searchers, right, of course, with John Wayne, when he doesn't say anything, you just see his eyes and back and forth. He doesn't even make a big reaction, but a small enough reaction that you say, "Oh shit," and let the movie speak for it is plentiful. I actually learned that lesson very much on a movie. I was supposed to make a face, and the scene ended up getting cut because I saw deleted scenes. Like, I would have cut it too because my face was really fucking stupid. I wish I was directing so I could have seen my face and said, "Nah, you're doing it all wrong." But I can't do everything. But I think that we were talking a lot about the special effects, and we got to mention Rob Bottin. And one thing I want to mention about the effects is this movie and Videodrome from '83. Now, I'm mentioning these two together because I think that the mixture of styles and effects and what they're saying, I think, have gone on to heavily influence Japanese cinema. So much so, with those two movies, you do not have Cyclops or Guzu, the Forsaken Thing, and a lot more bigger films from Japan. It's just all those movies, I think, have kind of solidified a lot of the weirdness in Japan with technology and special effects and stuff. But these effects are amazing. When you got Stan Winston coming in to fill in for you, you're in good fucking hands.
Well,
I don't know if you've ever seen Wild City or Wicked City. Sorry, Wicked City has a scene that's literally exactly like The Thing. Like, the guy's head comes off, and he's got spider legs, and it crawls around. So I see any old anime from the '90s, you're always seeing Thing references, John Carpenter movie references. It's like they love that shit in the '80s over there.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things where it's hard to avoid using that word, but it's one of those things where, because this was such a cutting edge concept, this was the first period of time where it was possible to do this. Rob Bottin was 22 when he did this film. He had met Carpenter on The Fog. He came in to do some special effects work on it, and also ended up playing Captain Blake in the movie. And obviously Carpenter liked him and trusted him and said, okay, let's go with it. The special effects budget was originally something like $200,000. It ballooned up in terms of the initial estimate that was submitted that Universal signed off on to $750,000, and then ended up going up even further than that, I think over $1 million. But it was money that was well spent because, obviously Bottin was working around the clock. I'm sure there were a lot of substances involved to keep him going. The way that the film, was barreling towards it had to be out in time. Universal saw this as a big summer movie. In June 1982, this movie was coming out in theaters come hell or high water. So they had to get Stan Winston to come in, and there were various other people that got involved as well. Albert Whitlock did the matte paintings. Albert Whitlock, who had been around since the silent era and done a lot of stuff for Hitchcock, is involved. So this movie is just like rammed full of like the best people in their craft at that time. Carpenter, as tough as the movie was to make, he loved making the film, and he was very proud of the end result for good reason, because obviously everything was to such a high level. No corners needed to be cut, no compromises needed to be made. And sometimes that can be a bad thing, but this just worked out perfectly here. I mean, and I think we also need to include in this equation American Werewolf from '81, because that trifecta of films really, really demonstrated to people what was possible. Because John Landis had this idea, I want to have a werewolf transformation in hard light. Okay, how are we going to do this? He did it. John Carpenter creates this movie where there's a creature that can imitate anything and just becomes like, expressionistic art at different points, depending on freeze framing. And then, of course, all the extraordinary stuff in Videodrome as well. I mean, but this is the period of time, the 1980s, where the horror stars are no longer Vincent Price and Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. It's either the directors like John Carpenter, George Romero, Dario Argento, or the special effects artists. And that's where people like Bottin, Tom Savini, Dick Smith, Stan Winston, all these people became bona fide celebrities in their own right.
Yeah, I can't think of any movies that have better effects in them personally and that are more impactful and used to the level, because there's not a million, there is, but the special effects are not throughout the entire movie. There's those three kind of big set pieces in there. Before we move on, anybody want to say anything else about the special effects? Or we know Rob Bottin put himself in the hospital, and he kind of got burnt out real fast in his career, which I don't blame him.
When I was rewatching it recently, I was just impressed. I also they look cartoony in a way, like they're very stylized, which I think adds to the uncanny valleyness of it. They almost look like comic book kind of sketches sometimes, like very there's this scene where they find they go to the other outpost and to see what happened, and they find the guy that he was kind of halfway transformed, and his face is stretched like putty up, like this was like one half here, and they zoom in on first off, it looks amazing. They can zoom in on it and it doesn't look fake. They zoom in on it and you just see this look on the man's face, this like fear that he had right before when he first realized that his body was changing. Because I find it interesting, the thing takes over their body, but I think some of their consciousness is still there because they kind of have to keep it up enough so they could talk and whatever and take over the brain and talk to the other people. So I feel like the person is trapped in there and they can feel when it's starting to happen or when they're twisting their body into these abominations. And all the scenes you talk about, especially, I can't even imagine what it was like in the movie theater when they were doing a defibrillator and he puts his arm in and it opens up like a mouth and eats his arms. What the fuck, man? That is one of the most surprising things. If you'd never heard of this movie, you would never guess in a million years that's what was going to happen when he did a defibrillator on the guy, right? And it looks incredible. And the scene, you also talked about it, the scene with the blood, when they're testing the blood, which is a great misdirect, because he said, the guy you think it is, he says, we're going to do yours last. And then he puts it in and immediately starts reacting. So, it surprises the audience. And him changing in real time, basically, right in front of him, and they're all connected to him. And eating a guy's head and holding the body. All of it looks incredible. I've never honestly seen any film with this much. You say there's not a lot of special effects, but when there are special effects happening, they're huge set pieces that encompass a whole lot of stuff going on. It kind of makes me think sad about, they made that Thing 2011 movie where it was, they made them paint over the practical effects with CG and it looks awful. And you just keep, and I know everybody talks about, we want the practical cut version of that, but it just is like a really good comparison, right? This is CG versus practical, and I think CG can look good, but I feel like CG is better when it's background things or things you're not focusing on, like filling in trees or backgrounds and stuff. But if it's just stuff you're looking straight on at, it's like practical. This movie is old. It's from 1982 and it still looks better than movies that come out now, even, I would think. Right. Some horror movies, it just ages so well.
I agree, and I think, and I'm not an anti-CG person as such, but I do think that there is something cold and distancing about CG, whereas I find something very inspiring, even about the old Ray Harryhausen stuff. That may look janky and jerky, but it's one guy sitting in a room, a frame at a time, animating these things. That's really, really cool when you think about that. And it has personality. I don't think that personality enters into it with the computer stuff. And as we're seeing now, we're getting into AI and everything else, and every muck on Facebook is I'm doing my AI version of myself, my action figure version. I'm like, will you stop it? Please stop it. It's enough.
It's just ugly. That's not all the other moral quandaries aside, it's butt fucking ugly.
It's ugly.
Every time I see AI, it's hideous looking.
It's hideous looking, but it's just wrong. It's wrong on so many different levels that I guess I don't want to sidetrack us too much. But CG, yes, like you said, to invisible effects in the background, that sort of thing can be really good. We've seen really good applications of it in terms of creating things that weren't possible before, like Lord of the Rings type things, where they were able to create these big landscapes, and it can be very impressive. But when it comes to like characters and creatures and things like that, it doesn't tend to work very well. Whereas Bottin stuff, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know, you could probably sit down any snarky teenage kid in front of this movie who's never seen it before, and they'd probably be impressed by it, I think. I mean, a lot of other stuff in that period may not hold up necessarily, but I think this one does.
For sure. We should also mention another thing that makes the special effects work so well is how they're shot. Although Dean Cundey did an excellent job with the amount of lighting, and the cinematography is exceptional in this movie, from the beautiful wide shots and the way the dog is moved around, the point of view shots that are thrown in there to throw off the audience. That's also scripting and directing, but there's a lot of point of view shots where you'll be going through these ways, and you're like, oh, we're in the point of view, and then you'll see the dog come this way, and you're like, oh shit, you just got me in the mindset to be like I'm hunting, but then the dog comes in, and they do that a couple times, so it's really clever, fun stuff. I do want to mention Randy Cook in the special effects here. Just one scene for the stop motion still remains, which is funny because he also did Q, the Winged Serpent, this year. So speaking of stop motion, hands-on stuff, the stop motion stuff was mostly cut, but we do have the big tentacle coming through to mention that. So somebody else in the crew, there's a lot of people in the background crew too. I can't remember the old British gentleman who did the production stuff, and he got into it with Rob Bottin. That guy, probably a little unsung hero on the work he did on this movie, setting up a lot of the places and sets and everything like that. Can't remember his name.
Oh, you mean the production designer?
Yeah. His stuff was great too.
Lloyd. Lloyd is the last name. I can't remember the first name. I think it is anyway. I can't remember his first name. I know Bottin had a big problem with Roy Arbogast.
That's the guy,
Roy Arbogast was the kind of pyrotechnic on-set mechanical guy, and Bottin and he did not get along. As a matter of fact, Bottin was trying really... He already had so much on his plate. I mean, God love him. He was ambitious, but he wanted to play Palmer. And he kept talking to Carpenter about, what if... And Arbogast was like, if that happens, I'm leaving. I'm quitting. There's no way I'm going to have this little punk get in here and play this role as well. Which Carpenter was never going to cast him. He's like, no, there's no way you can do this. So, there were clashes of personality. And definitely the thing with Bottin and Cundey is a typical kind of special effects kind of conflict where, the effects people spend hours and hours, months and years sometimes creating these things, and then they want to keep it all in the shadows. Fortunately, Carpenter was very much like, oh, no, I want to see this. I want to be able to see it. But Cundey was like, it needs a little bit of help here and there. So he was kind of using more sort of spotlighting here and there and keeping certain things hidden in the shadows, which I think was the right call. You can see, if you compare this with another film that's often considered to be part of a trilogy of films Carpenter did, in the Mouth of Madness, because he didn't have the money and he didn't have the resources at the end of the film. The creatures that we see are done in sort of flash cuts and are kept very much kind of in the distance and out of focus, which was 100% the right call, because those didn't look so good. But the way it works in the movie, it works just fine. But here, it could stand up. So like Michele said, you can zoom in on this stuff, and it holds up, even in high def. Which, I mean, don't forget, this is a movie that was being shown in some engagements, and even in 70 millimeter back in 1982. So that level of detail, that held up amazingly well.
Definitely want to mention Ennio Morricone, who is in argument to be the best movie composer of all time. So if you got the studio, if you got whoever you want to get, why not get Ennio Morricone? And I know that Alan Howarth and John Carpenter did some of the additional little cues in there and stuff, and I do think that's a lot of what you do remember from the thing. But the big orchestral score is also really excellent. It's a great mixture.
Yeah, Carpenter said that he had the option to score it himself, in the same way he had the option to write the script himself, but he was tired from doing so many movies back to back where he was writing scripts. He was also involved in writing Halloween 2, which was a very unhappy experience. He was very, very disgruntled about that. So he kind of wanted somebody to take the load off a little bit. And originally he wanted to get Jerry Goldsmith, but Jerry Goldsmith wasn't available. So he got Morricone. And the funny thing is Morricone didn't speak English. Carpenter didn't speak Italian. So Morricone wrote a lot of music that isn't actually in the film. If you ever get the soundtrack, there's a lot of stuff. It's really beautiful stuff. I don't know where it would have fit. I think he made the right call, because he ends up sort of cutting and pasting and reconfiguring it and reusing certain themes. But it works really, really well, and it fits Carpenter's own approach to scoring, which has this kind of insistent, repetitive quality to it. The stuff that he and Alan Howarth, no relation, added into the score is very much kind of tone and very sort of, slight droning effects, very similar to the kind of music that they were doing for Christine not long after this. So it's an amazing soundtrack. I think it works beautifully. I mean, I know that it was not necessarily well received at the time. It won a Razzie or something at that time for the worst score. Can you believe that? But I think it's an amazing soundtrack.
And then that score reused for Hateful Eight won an Oscar.
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck the Razzies.
Well, part of it.
Fuck the Razzies. Literally, it's nonsense. It's pure nonsense.
I agree.
As Gary says, pure nonsense. This is pure nonsense.
You believe
my
this
favorite
movie
lines in the movie.
bullshit?
I love that line too, but I love what Gary's like, there's pure nonsense. This doesn't prove a thing. And he's got such good voice in here. There's something else I find when we get to the fan theories. I was thinking of saying the pure nonsense line because some of them are just like, just shut up. Like, just shut up. Like, I literally, like, to explain it, I'm just like, if that's the case, then it completely defeats 90% of this movie, and I can't believe that. But anyone else in the cast or crew mentioned, I know we brushed on a lot of the actors, but we didn't mention T.K. Carter, who's a very memorable actor, a very 80s of the rollerblades in here. Love his look. He's also great in Southern Comfort. There's so many Thomas Waits from The Warriors, and he personally plays one of my favorite recurring roles in Oz. He plays a character named Harry Stanton, and he is so funny in that show. He has one of my lines where he gets accused of something and he didn't do it, but he's going to be pinned for it. And I don't want to it's a dirty line, but the way he delivers it is really funny. I would recommend checking him out in Oz. And just so many great characters. Richard Masur, It and Nightmares a year later. Turned down Poltergeist, a chance to be in Poltergeist for this movie. And he eventually came out and said, you know what, I think I made the right call. I'm glad I'm in the thing. So just an amazing cast of actors that I've seen a lot of their career later on. And some of them kind of disappear so much in the roles, like David Clennon. He's one of the best roles in the film. That he's an actor that's been in a million things, but I never could spot the guy because he's a chameleon.
Oh, no, David Clennon usually played like preppy types, lawyers, uptight, sort of, upper crust characters, and see him playing a stoner. I mean, he's great. He has some of the best lines in the film. They practically built South America. He taught the Incas everything they know. I mean, I love it. Oh, and my favorite bit, and I quote this all the time. Anytime the opportunity presents itself, I just go, "Hey, well, thanks for thinking about it, though."
Yeah,
I love that. I love that bit.
These guys all have little bits of their personality that remind me of guys I actually know. So it's always like, it's something that so-and-so would say. And how can I not mention Keith David, who's one of my all-time favorite actors ever.
Yeah.
So good in this. Voodoo bullshit Blair. And he's so good in this. And he's a badass. He's a tough guy, I'll take it. Maybe somebody a little bit more level-headed Childs, This is so good. So good. I do want to talk about some fan theories and things like that. I do want to talk about the other kind of adaptations of the thing and all that kind of stuff that branched off. But, talking about the fan theories, we always have the idea, right, that who was the thing when the shadow on the wall? That would be Norris. So that's got to be. There's only two guys it can be. It's Norris or Palmer, and it's actually a crew member in the shadow. So it's never you're never able to figure it out. I personally probably guess it's Norris at the time, but hey, that's just me. Anybody else on that one?
Well, I mean, I don't want to hog it, but the ending. I think the ending is the big thing here that we can talk about, because the ending was very much a source of contention when the movie was first previewed in the Red Rock Theater in Las Vegas ahead of the general release. It got very mixed reactions. For a lot of the reasons we've been talking about. Oh, it's too bloody, it's too brutal. It's really not that bloody. It's mostly just icky. There's not much actual blood in it. There is some, but not a ton of it. Not as much as you would think. It's goo. It's goo. And it's interesting when you think about Carpenter in general. Like, he makes horror films, he makes action films, but in general, I wouldn't describe his movies as being like gore fests. Later, Vampires and Ghosts of Mars are pretty gory, but for the most part, it's more sort of tension, suspense, that kind of thing. But in this particular case, nobody liked the ending, and there was a lot of pressure on about changing the ending. There were different ideas that were considered. They were going to do an ending where Kurt Russell was rescued and taken back, and they test him, and it turns out, oh, he's not the thing after all, and everybody's happy. And there was a lot of pressure to change it, and Carpenter was so worn down by the whole thing. It was such an arduous shoot, and he was taking so much shit that he kind of gave in at one point and said, fine, go ahead and do it. But Stuart Cohen said, you don't really think that. That's not really what you want. You got to stick up for yourself. So he did. He had the right of final cut. So he said, no, I'm going to keep it the way it is, which he always felt that Sid Sheinberg, the head of Universal, held over him when the movie didn't do well. And so his career kind of got derailed. I wouldn't say it was destroyed, but it definitely got derailed. Didn't quite go the way it could have been. But the ambiguity of the ending, which is typical of a lot of his films, Halloween, The Fog, a lot of these films end on a question mark or an ellipsis. We don't really know what's going to happen. He doesn't end Halloween with Michael Myers not being down there because he's like, oh shit, we're going to make bank doing sequels. He had no idea that was going to happen. He just liked the idea of that open, ambiguous ending and not really clarifying what Michael is. That's ruined later by all these sequels and ridiculousness that had nothing to do with him. But the same thing with The Fog. It's just sort of leaving the door open to different interpretations. I love the fact that the thing ends on a note of just total ambiguity. We don't know what's going to happen. And so many people, when I've talked about this film and I've written about this film, and they'll say, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know, and I don't want to know. I like that I don't know. I don't feel that I have to fill that in. Carpenter has been asked many, many times. I didn't ask him because I knew what I would get from him. But, he'd say, I know, but I'm not telling because I don't want that to be. And that was kind of similar to what Kubrick and David Lynch used to do, too, which was, I don't really want to explain this thing to you. It's you can make of it whatever you want to make of it. So I like not knowing. I don't feel that it needs to be explained. And I'm quite okay with just saying, I don't know.
I've seen some fan theories. They talk about, and I kind of watched it a little closer this time, that Childs doesn't have breath. Like, like when, McCready's talking, there's like a bunch of fog from it because it's cold and then condensation. And then when Childs I'm like, dude, it's just different takes. And like, maybe he was in a spot where the wind wasn't hitting him. I guess, but then later,
Bennings has breath, so it doesn't make sense. Bennings has breath earlier when he is the thing.
That's what I'm saying.
That's the dumbest thing I ever heard in my life. Like, that's just stupidity.
People are just very desperate for closure. I find that any kind of ending to anything where there's not closure, it makes people viscerally angry for some reason. Maybe it's a human trait or something, I guess. Like the ending of Sopranos, for example, or like Seinfeld's another one. Yeah. But this film, I think it's better because it's ambiguous. That's a stronger, more interesting, more compelling ending. I love the last line. Let's sit around a while and see what happens. I love that. Yeah. That's such a great way to end it. It's like so interesting and like it leaves you unsettled, just like the entire film. Like maybe none of them's a thing and they beat it. Maybe one's a thing and they're gonna attack the other one. Either way, they're probably both gonna die, right? Because
they're dead. Yeah,
they're dead.
They're gonna freeze to death. They're already icing up at the end. Like that's why they're sharing the liquor, right? So they feel warm. When they die of their hypothermia or whatever, they're both dead either way. So it doesn't matter really, honestly. But yeah,
you could get away with it in the 60s and 70s with this kind of ambiguity. The 80s is where that starts to change. The climate is changing. The 80s is kind of like the morning after from the hedonism of the 70s. AIDS is coming in, all this paranoia, fear of intimacy, Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, this demonization of the poor, this demonization of social programs, rebranding things as communism and everything else. I mean, things that are still playing out to this day. I mean, this is like Reagan 2.0, times 10. But, during this period of time, there's this move towards more kind of films as escapism. This is the idea of movies that need to be entertaining. And I always struggle with the idea of, is a movie meant to be entertaining? Well, I would have a hard time saying that I think a movie like The Pianist or Schindler's List is entertaining. But I think they're great films. I think they do what they're supposed to do. Some films are meant to be fun. Some films are not meant to be fun, but as long as they're engaging. So Carpenter is often accused of being somebody who knows how to set up a really good story, but then flounders in the last act. And I don't agree with that. I maybe once or twice. I'm not nuts about the ending of Vampires, for example. I don't think they quite nailed that one. But everything else, I have no problem with the ending and the fact that, nowadays we also like shoot offs and side stories and world building, and it's all very much based in this idea of over explaining everything to the nth degree. What's everybody's backstory? What happens to everybody when they go here or there? And we need to have a 3 part of this. It can't just be one. We got to have a trilogy, and everything's got to be somehow part of a bigger context. And that's one of the great things about the thing is it's its own self-contained little story. Even if they want to do a prequel later on, that's fine. Do we really need to know what happened at the Norwegian camp? Not really, because we know how it ended. But that's fine if you want to do it. But that refusal to answer, I find that not only haunting, but also very disturbing as well.
Before we move on from that, I do want to get into just the way I interpret John Carpenter's work in general. And what Stuart Gordon said, he said it's not really supposed to have an ending. Bill Lancaster said neither of them is probably the thing, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. That's not the point of the story. If you're so hung up on who the thing is, you miss the point of the movie. You don't get the movie. So I'm sorry to say, if you're constantly, I like talking about it just the same way I like talking about how does the thing mechanism work. But there's no answer to it. It's very confusing. Do they all know they're the thing? Do they not know they're the thing? I do know that Blair knew he was the thing because he's in the basement building the damn spaceship. The other ones, I'm not so sure if they did. It feels like Norris didn't even know he was the thing. And also there's other comments about the very ending here. The whiskey, it's actually gasoline. Shut up. Just shut up. You're just adding in shit. That's complete nonsense. They shouldn't share that because it's biological. It doesn't matter anymore because if either of them are a thing, they're both dead. They're dead. They don't care if they share the whiskey. It's not a thing there. The only truth I ever saw in any of the theories that Childs may be the thing, which I don't personally believe because I believe Carpenter's mentality is, hey, they beat it, but they're going to freeze to death because, hey, nihilism. That's my bag.
Yeah.
But there is a point of view shot towards the end when they go into the cellar when Gary and Knowles and it does this weird point of view shot. Earlier you see Childs standing there with his blue coat and there's another blue coat hanging on the back. When it does the point of view shot, it goes through there almost like the dog scene earlier, and you see the door open and that blue coat is gone, suggesting that Childs got turned into the thing, his clothes got shredded, and he threw on the other blue coat. Maybe that's just a misdirection, similar to the way Dean Cundy didn't light Child's eyes at the end. Another misdirection, even though the fire's behind him. So if you guys know how real lighting works, there wouldn't be light on fucking Child's eyes. But because he didn't light Palmer's eyes. These are just small misdirections to make you think subconsciously that you're always worried. Now, do they mean anything? Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It's there to just throw you off. Everything's there to make you feel uneasy. It's just, and I personally, I don't care if they're the thing. I don't think either of them are the thing, and I think they're just going to freeze to death and die. And then somebody might find them frozen, and maybe they find the thing frozen, 2 bits of them. So it's just, it could make a sequel. As far as the prequel is concerned, I know I'm going off on a tirade here. I was watching it, and I don't mind this prequel. I don't think it's the worst movie ever made, but I think it's lazy and kind of pointless because you already have half the story done. You just got to fill in the blanks. And the idea that they try to use the crawling head thing, I'm like, create your own mythology, you fucking lazy bastards. Make some cool monsters we haven't seen yet. And I read the script. I didn't read the postscript. I heard a lot about the postscript where they go into the very detail that the tiny little cells will turn you to a thing. If that's the case for this movie, they were all doomed the second that dog jumped on Bennings and tried to lick his face. Fucked, right? In the A, right there. So the idea when Fuchs says, do not share any alcohol, do not share anything, they share the damn knife. That's the only flop in the movie is Windows wipes it off on his pants and then they cuts the same thing. I have to assume, like the book, that they sanitized the knife and Windows didn't sanitize the last time. That's because they don't necessarily show it. You can't show them sanitize the knife every time. That's my only complaint on it. I do think that the thing has to be in close proximity of you to assimilate you. And I think it takes a little bit of time. I don't think it's I sneezed in your face and you're the thing. If that were the case, there's no point even trying.
I like that they don't spend a lot of time trying to explain that. Like Troy was saying, I think in modern day pop culture, there's this obsession with lore and there being a reason for everything. I think that's kind of what ruined the Hellraiser films after a while. Because in the original Hellraiser, Pinhead is just like this scary demon. You don't know. All you know is like they're from another dimension where pain, it could be hell, or whatever. But you don't, and then like in part 2, it's got a little bit more, and in 3, they're like giving him a backstory, his history, and you're looking at his fucking photo album from like when he was a kid and stuff. It's like too much. I feel like there's too much. That's because, like, also Troy was saying, there's this tendency now to want to make everything into like a franchise. Everything, thanks to Marvel. This is Marvel's fault.
Content.
Everything's got to be content. We can have a side story, a comic book, the Star Wars. Now we have to know the history of Han Solo. Like, he was just a cool dude, man. He's a cool guy.
Yeah.
We don't need his backstory. I don't care. Like, the more you fill it in, the more chances there are to mess it up, in my opinion. And the thing is a great example of giving you just enough information to understand what's going on. Who cares how the thing does it? Like, it doesn't matter I guess you could have a part where scientists like, this is how the thing works, and he actually takes over your cell. I mean, they show a little bit where they're like, here's a normal cell, here's a gnarly cell, and it makes it gnarly. Yeah. That's all you need. You don't need this whole scientific backstory on it. It just works because it also works better because you kind of don't know how the thing works. It gives you more room to play around with it in the story, right? You're not writing yourself into like holes. You're not painting yourself into a corner. There's some ambiguity around it, so like you can play around with who was the thing and how they turn it into a thing. It doesn't matter. It's scary. Anybody can be the thing. That's the great part about it, I guess.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's like this tendency to just over-explain every single aspect of everything, and then you have people that make their whole like influencer culture around pointing out plot holes and that kind of thing. Like, they'll have like that video, 47 plot holes in the thing, and it's like, this guy's finger was like this, and now it's like this in the next scene, or how did that shirt get the hole there? And it's like, who cares? There's like this, people are so obsessed with plot and like things only serving the plot, and they're like, there's such a thing as like vibes and aesthetic and just feelings, and it's just like, I feel like people are just getting lost in the weeds and not seeing the entire forest, like the entire picture of what is this movie trying to convey to you? What type of emotion is it trying to make you feel?
Exactly. And one of my big things is Italian horror and genre films. And there's this kind of conception that a lot of people have that these directors like Bava, Argento, Fulci, they just don't know how to tell a story. They don't understand stories like they do. I mean, all three of them, in certain films demonstrate this very clearly. The fact that certain things don't necessarily make sense is not a problem. They are doing something deliberately. It's about creating a particular effect. They're not concerned about the story. A movie doesn't have to just be based in story. So an irony in this is that, to your point about what happened with Hellraiser, maybe it's just as well that the thing flopped when it did, because they didn't feel the need to kind of expand on this and do what they did with Halloween, which was such a big hit that they kind of drag Carpenter kicking and screaming back into it, saying, well, if you want to make the thing, you got to produce and write this sequel to Halloween. It's like, all right, fine, but I'm not directing the thing. Although, funnily enough, he did end up directing parts of it because it didn't turn out very well. Where he realized there's no story left. I don't know what to do with this. Oh, shit, let's just make him Michael's brother. Oh, man, that was not a good idea, and he admits that, but then that sort of gets, threaded through for a while, and then it turns into he's somehow connected to the Druids, and it turns into this ludicrous thing where, and I think it's even Carpenter in an interview makes a sarcastic comment, which he does a lot, about what's going to happen with Michael next. He said, I don't know, maybe it'll be Michael in space. Well, the Friday the 13th people were listening, because then they go off and they do Jason X, and it's like and indeed Hellraiser does the same thing as well. So it's this kind of ludicrous. I think even Amityville did one in space. So there's always this sort of ludicrous, like we've got to top it somehow. We've got to keep topping it, and that's part of the problem. So maybe in an ironic sort of way, even though it was sad for everybody involved, maybe it's just as well that the thing didn't do that, because then it could just be its own sort of tiny little island in the 1980s.
To add on to that, when people say, I'm talking about the original Predator or something, they say, well, in the sequels, I'm only talking about the original. So I am basing everything in knowledge off that movie. I don't give a shit what happened in the comic line 30 seconds, 30 million things. That was not the original director or writer's intent. This is Predator. This is how he works in this movie, and this is the rules. I'm following that. Do whatever you want with those other things. I'm not interested.
There you go.
So the different renditions, the different kind of things. We had radio plays where certain characters are not the thing, and the endings are different. The radio play is pretty interesting. We also have novelizations from the actual original script, which changes characters' endings and things like that. There's 3 characters in this that their deaths were changed. Knowles, Fuchs, and Bennings all had different deaths and how things like that. So many different interesting takes on all this stuff. And the video game, the Dark Horse comic, the video game, they open up different ways they interpret.
I played that game. It wasn't half bad actually, and they actually just remastered it too, so it's getting some little extra attention. They just maybe I would say 3 weeks ago they released a remaster of it and changed a little bit of the gameplay and stuff. So if anybody wants to play the Thing game, it's not bad and it's easily available again.
Yeah, and to your point about the changes that they made to some of the deaths, they did originally, they were almost kind of like slasher scenes that were done, where characters were killed off in very different ways. And they had a very luxurious shooting schedule for this. They started in late August of 1981, shot, all this sort of studio stuff, and then they went up to British Columbia in December and wrapped it, right around Christmas time. So during that, there was a gap where Carpenter sat down and kind of assembled what he had, looked at it and said, this isn't working, this just isn't right. So they had to kind of go back and rethink it, and that's where there was rewriting going on. Even though it's only credited to Bill Lancaster, Carpenter had a big hand in rewriting that script and adjusting it and sort of, rethinking how he's going to approach it. So again, it may not all have been what was originally planned, but it's just like everything seemed to happen for a reason to take it to that place, to make it the perfect film that it is, at least from my point of view. And you mentioned Bill Lancaster being the writer, and I remember there was an interview with Carpenter in Cinefantastique when he was gearing up to make the film, and he said that it was written by Bill Lancaster, and the interviewer kind of chuckled and said, well, he wrote The Bad News Bears, and Carpenter said, who gives a shit? He said, this is what happens. actors get typecast, and then writers, it's the same way. Just because he wrote that doesn't mean he can't write this. So he stood up for him. And said that he was a terrific writer. And actually, Lancaster did write the script for Firestarter when Carpenter was going to do it, but unfortunately that all fell apart after not just The Thing, but also Halloween 3. That's a separate topic in and of itself, but those were, kind of the death knell for Carpenter at Universal.
It's unfortunate. Halloween 3 also had Nigel Neal in there, and we should mention how similar The Thing is to the Quatermass movies. Brings up the same conversations where how does this Quatermass experiment creature work? It's very much The Thing. And I would have been interesting to see Nigel Neal take a tackle at The Thing, honestly. But I bet it would have been a little bit more old-fashioned.
Well, they didn't get along very well when it happened. It was one of those never meet your idol situations. Carpenter talked about it later and said, he was just a grumpy old man by the time I got to him. But he said, but hey, people say that about me, so what do I know? My experience talking with him for my book and interviewing him, I found him to be delightful. But he's a very, very dry, funny, sarcastic guy. He doesn't like talking about his own movies. You get him going about other topics, he'll talk a blue streak about movies he loves. He'll talk about Howard Hawks or Dario Argento. He loves talking video games. He loves talking basketball. There's all kinds of things he likes talking about when it comes to his own movies, and especially when it comes to the unpleasant memories. He just won't go there anymore. It's just like, it's done. He said, it's fine. Everything's fine. I've just made peace with that. I think he's just down through the years. He's kind of done a lot of sort of self-analysis, and has realized it's just not worth hanging on to all the anger. So he just has he's very zen about it all, but he's very often misunderstood. And I see this all the time online. Oh, he's just a cynical old jerk and he's just a money grubber. He's like, you know what? I did my dues. I worked like a dog for years and years. If people want to pay me to do, very little, hey, I'll do it. And just recently, apparently he committed in front of an audience to score Bong Joon-ho's next picture, which that should be very interesting.
I saw him live when he was touring with his son, who is an incredible musician, by the way.
Yeah.
Plays keyboards like madman. When I saw him live, it was just adorable, I guess, because his son was kind of doing like a lot of the heavy lifting, like as far as like the actual like playing of the songs. And then like Carpenter himself, he was standing in front of stage and he had black sunglasses on. He was just standing
Dancing
around, and then every once in a while he'd have his keyboard in front of him. He'd hit like a badass bass tone on it. Like they gave him the easier parts. It was pretty obvious, but he played the shit out of them parts, and he just has so much, like as the kids would say, aura. He had high aura. He had a lot of riz.
I saw him in 2016, and he was just up there, and he's doing this old man dance. He's up on the stage. He was so fun to watch. I just had such a great time.
I also don't get that whole like negative aspect about him. People go, "Oh, he's rude." It's like, have you guys never talked to another old guy, man? They're funny. They're funny in like a kind of dry
sarcastic
way. Yeah, sarcastic. And I'm very sarcastic too. You know what I mean? I'm very nihilistic in my humor. I say fucked up shit because sometimes it's the way I feel. But
I have always felt a certain weird kinship with him because, I'm a very sort of shy, awkward person around people I don't know. You put me in a room full of people and I just clam up. And I get the impression from other people who've talked about him, who've worked with him, that he's basically a very shy, awkward kind of person. And I think part of it is he's not comfortable talking about himself seriously. So you're not going to get him doing the kind of David Cronenberg expostulating about the themes and everything, which Cronenberg does very well. He talks about his movies like a craftsman building chairs. He just talks about the nuts and bolts aspects of it. But I think because he is very shy and kind of, self-effacing and everything, he's very sort of introspective, and he kind of shies away from it a little bit, which can kind of make him, I think, come across as gruff and disagreeable. But I think he's funny as hell, personally, and I love his movies. And my dealing with him was totally positive, so I can't say anything negative.
Do you think he's going to make more movies? Did he ever kind of talk about, did you ask him if he's ever really into doing that ever again?
Oh,
or
he
like as a director?
He likes to say, oh yeah, I'm working on things, don't rule it out. My feeling is if he really wanted to do it, he'd be doing it. There are ways, let's look at some of the old school guys that have even gone into like crowdfunding to get movies going. I think if he really wanted to make a movie, he would. I think he's burnt out, quite frankly, from years and years. I mean, once he hit the ground running in the 70s, the whole way through to 2000, that's what I talked to him about. It was kind of, why did you step away? And he said, did you ever see the behind the scenes material about scoring Ghosts of Mars? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, as soon as I saw that stuff, I said, I've got to stop or I'm going to die. He said, I looked awful. He said, I didn't realize how bad I looked. And he had health problems for a while. He looks, he doesn't look great. Obviously, he's been through, some stuff, and he's had some health issues. But he seems to really enjoy doing the music, and I think he's content, and I think he's happily retired. I think if he really wanted to make another movie, he would do it. The last thing he attached his name to as a director was this kind of misbegotten reality TV thing, John Carpenter's Suburban Nightmares, where he literally instructed a crew in, I don't know, Bulgaria or something via Zoom. And it was like, oh man, you don't want to be doing this. This isn't what you want to go out on. So I don't think he really cares. Because even I asked him why he did The Ward, he kind of said, I got talked into that. I don't think he really wanted to do that. Although his 2 Masters of Horror episodes I thought were really good, especially Cigarette Burns, which I love. And Pro-Life is really ballsy too. I like it. So I don't think it's going to happen, but I could be wrong.
It's nice seeing his second life kind of on talk shows when he talks about his music. Seeing him on Colbert and seeing him get the walk, the Hollywood Walk Star was great too. And he keeps throwing up the devil horns. That's his go-to.
Oh yeah.
Like this, very, very actually weird to say cute. It's kind of cute, you know what I mean? And
I think so.
I always love the relationship. People always be like, oh, I love listening to the Kurt Russell and John Carpenter commentaries because John Carpenter sounds so grouchy. I'm like, no, he doesn't. Like Kurt Russell is just incredibly enthusiastic about everything. Like, yeah, if you put like anybody next to Kurt Russell, they're gonna sound grouchy just because the way. But that was so great to see them kind of get his star. That was just well deserved when he's still alive, thankfully.
Oh yeah. And then Kurt Russell was there, and so was Keith David, which was really nice. And of course, we have to mention Keith David. We kind of glossed over him, but his his performance in this film is, I think, an amazing performance. And of course, he came back to do They Live, which is another incredibly prescient and forward-thinking film, and a movie that weirdly got adopted by the right in a strange sort of way, and totally like. And I mentioned that to him, and he said, what can I say? He said, obviously they didn't understand it because the point of the film is anything but right wing. He's not a right wing filmmaker at all. Or right-wing person for that matter. So, I mean, I guess anything can be kind of twisted and distorted to fit any kind of agenda if you try hard enough, and that's what ended up happening.
The one line that I wanted to bring up, which is funny, because people arguing about how the thing works, and it's summed up pretty quick when Child says, "How's this motherfucker wake up out of the ice after thousands of years?" and McReady replies, "It ain't like us, you see, Childs. It's different. I don't know. Ask him." And then we have the beautiful zoom in of Blair, and he just looks, and it goes dark. That happens twice with Blair. Those are beautiful transitions. They do it once with Gary too. The transitions are haunting, absolutely haunting. They remind me of The Shining when it will say the days and go like dark. Very similar. Very well edited. This movie is incredibly well edited, and they definitely found the edit. You definitely had a bunch of footage that was cut, and we've never seen a lot of that footage and the original scripts and stuff like that. But I guess the only thing I really want to mention is our personal discovery of the film, which can be brief.
I saw it as a kid with my dad, who I get all of my movie loving from because he was a movie. He's passed away sadly, but he was a movie buff. We had a bunch of VHS all over the place, and I saw it with my dad, and I thought it was amazing. He would just put on horror movies, which my mom did not appreciate. She does not like horror movies to this day, even. But when I was growing up, I had zero. I could watch anything. They didn't say, "Oh, it's R-rated, you can't watch it." I demonstrated, I guess, that I could understand that it was not real. My dad sat me down. It's people in makeup, and I was like, "Oh, well, that's not scary. That's people in makeup." And anytime I would start getting scared, he would just like, "It's a guy in makeup," and I'm like, "Oh yeah," So I've watched Hellraiser with my dad, Hellraiser 2, The Thing, Dawn of the Dead, like all these like movies, horror movies, and that's how I watched it. And I was just, I'm not gonna lie, it gave me nightmares. It's scary. I mean, all those monster things, in it. But and then of course I've seen it like probably like 20 times since then. It's just like every Halloween I put it on. It's just kind of like one of those classic films, almost a comfort film, which sounds weird, but it just is like it's just a great film. So yeah, I saw it as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, my story is not totally dissimilar. My parents, both of whom are gone now, unfortunately. My mom was a horror movie buff. She was really into like Hammer films and things like that, and she also liked John Carpenter a lot. My dad wasn't so much a horror movie buff as such, although he liked some of them. I think he liked them more than he would let on in later years. I think he kind of, maybe to have an added piece of connection with me, he started exploring them a little bit more, and we would talk about them. But they were very, very lenient with what I was allowed to watch. I mean, I do not remember. I don't have that seminal moment where I was like, "Oh, I like horror movies." I just always did. My mom's mom died when I was just shy of 3 years old, and even she had commented on, "Well, he likes this stuff because you were watching movies like The Omen when you were pregnant with him." It's like, I was 3. So I like this stuff right away. I do not remember discovering Christopher Lee and Boris Karloff. Like, I always knew these people. Basil Rathbone, all these actors. I knew who they were from the time I was just a little child. My dad used to say, "I guarantee he's the only kid in school who knows who played the female lead in Frankenstein." I said, "Mae Clarke." So I was just always ravenous about this stuff. And I loved John Carpenter from the time I was a child because I had seen Halloween on TV. And so the very first movie I can remember seeing in a theater, it's not a horror movie, is Annie, but that came out the same year as The Thing. I didn't go to see The Thing. I don't think that my parents even thought, it might be too much. But I caught it on TV, and to be honest with you, I didn't like it at first. It took me a while for it to grow on me. And it was true of some of his other movies, like Prince of Darkness. I didn't like it all for a long time. I didn't get it. Then all of a sudden I watched it at one point. It's like, oh man, this is great. So it took me a little while to kind of warm up to the thing. But when I did, it was just one of those like eureka moments, like, oh man, this thing is amazing. So I first encountered it on TV. I don't think it was that awful Sid Sheinberg TV cut where they added on the narration and changed the editing and ending and all that stuff.
They changed the ending in the TV cut to what?
I don't remember precisely how they ended it. I think I'd have to go back. I'm pretty sure it's included as an extra on, if not the Arrow release, then maybe on the Shout release. But Sheinberg wasn't happy with the way the film had performed and was pissed off at Carpenter for not changing the ending, so he changed it.
Wow.
The ending is different. There's narration. There's all kinds of different stuff that was tinkered with. I don't think I saw that version at the time, but I saw it on TV, on video. Hand and scanned, looked awful, of course. You know, these widescreen films of his, you need to see them in the right aspect ratio to really appreciate the artistry. Anyway, that's a long rambling answer, but I saw it sometime in the 80s as a child.
I think I was a big horror fan growing up. That's the same, you know, and probably like my grandfather brought down the Universal horror movies, so I was hooked on them right away, running around the house acting like Wolfman because I had the crooked teeth on the bottom, so I'd always do the behind things, and I love the Universal monsters, so I was obsessed with monsters. Got into A Night of the Living Dead I saw early, and Romero was probably my gateway to like big time horror, 9, 10, something like that, Day of the Dead, which has a lot of similarities to The Thing, and that's probably why I like The Thing so much. Those two movies, just people arguing. I know, I love it, but so I saw this on Sci-Fi Channel, probably maybe 8, 9, somewhere around that time, just parts of it playing on there, and I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. So eventually I rented it because the cover's cool, but the alien terror, they fucked up the tagline. The original tagline was brilliant. Warm as the man is placed to hide. Terrifying tagline. So I rented it and I liked it. And over time, VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, every single time I watched it, it got better. Worked its way up the rankings into the top 10, the top 5, wherever it's at now in my favorite film rankings. And it just gets better every single time I see it. And it's one of the, you know, sometimes you see stuff when you're younger, it doesn't hold up as you get older. The best ones, my favorite ones, are ones I love when I'm young, that when I rewatch, there's new discoveries and they hold up. The Thing, Day of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead, a lot of the classics,
sure.
You know, they just hold up. And there's a lot of interesting qualities about them. They're not just, they work on many levels, intellectual and entertainment. And that's usually where I connect with them.
Yeah, I've had it on just about every format. I had it on VHS, I had it on Laserdisc, I had it on DVD, 2 or 3 times on Blu-ray. Now I've got a 4K. And I'm sure when they put out a much more lavish 4K edition, because the current one doesn't have most of the good stuff on it, I'll buy it again. And if they come out with 8K or 12K or 16K or whatever the fuck K they come out with, I'll probably keep buying it. It's one of those movies like Rosemary's Baby or Deep Red or Taxi Driver, you know, any number of films I can point to that it doesn't matter. Frankenstein, I'll buy them. I'll just keep buying them. I'm just that big of a schmuck. I will keep buying them.
Yeah, me too as well. Is there anything you guys want to end on for The Thing? Maybe a favorite character. Just everybody throw out their favorite character. I don't want to pick, but favorite character that's not really loved. You know what I mean? Not a Childs, not a McReady, just kind of a side character that you love, that you don't think gets enough love. Most underrated. We'll do that.
God, I don't know if I would say Doc Hopper or Gary. I'd say Gary. I really like Donald Moffat as Gary. His eyebrows, man, they're characters in and of themselves. He was David Hemmings before even David Hemmings was David Hemmings. But I like him a lot. There's a kind of a vulnerability about him that I find oddly touching.
Mine's definitely Doc Hopper. I think he has one of the more interesting character arcs in the film, and he gets a lot of fun scenes and I just like the idea of, you know, a scientific type person seeing death staring him straight into the face and then completely crumbling in the face of it.
I think you might get a little mixed.
Like
Are you
when
talking
they keep
Blair?
him out in the thing.
Blair or Copper?
Blair.
Are you doing Blair or Copper?
Sorry, Blair.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah,
Blair,
it's a mixture. Yeah, Copper's the guy who gets his arms bit off, I think. Blair, they look similar, though. They're both bald old guys.
Well, old is relative. This is a whole discussion we had before because, you know, let's just say what Michele was saying before. It used to be, you know, I was like,
yeah.
I think it's typical when I was like in my 20s, I thought people in their 40s were old. Now I'm like, that ain't old. And I'm thinking, well, what is old? And I'm like, yeah, maybe 80 plus. Maybe that's old.
Old is just older than me at whatever age I am currently. It's my age plus 10. That's old.
There you go. When people refer to like this movie as an old movie, I'm like, it's not old. Come on, man. I'm thinking like 30s, 40s movies. So.
I didn't mean to cut you off there, Michelle, but it's confusing because they're both doctors, but they don't call Dr. Blair Dr. Blair. They say Blair because he's a biologist and Doc Copper's the health doctor. It's weird. It's like silly.
I even wrote it down and I looked at it and I still said it wrong.
They're both a thing. It's all right.
The only reason I wanted to correct you is because I think Copper's my underrated guy this time around, Do you have anything else to say about it, Michelle? Oh, so yeah, I think Copper is just underrated. Like, is that a man or something in there? Because I do think that McRady and Childs get a lot of love, as they should, and Palmer, because he's got the iconic line. But, I think Copper is kind of it's just, in the script, they have this little introduction for all the characters, and the only one I noticed was changed was Sanchez was turned to Windows, and they said there's a really funny line that says Copper, a decent man, a good man, good at his job, and then it says Sanchez, who's Windows, bad at his job. That's like he's bad at his job. And you're like, that's about right? That's why everybody's yelling at him the whole movie. But I really appreciate
that's one of my favorite moments is when he's asleep at the station and Gary comes up behind him and cranks up the volume and he jumps out of his chair. I always get a kick out of that.
Did this whole video without anybody doing the Gary line tied to this fucking couch.
Oh man, yeah, that's a great moment. Boy, isn't that, I mean, it's a great line, but how beautifully delivered that is. And also because he is such a kind of straight and narrow character the whole way through, I don't think he even swears until that moment, and then he drops an F-bomb. That's just that's kind of epic. It's kind of like hearing your dad swear for the first time.
Yeah, grandpa or something down there. Does anybody have any plugs or anything they want to say before we go?
I don't even know. Like I'm working on a couple of things. I just finished up a really fun project for Arrow that I enjoyed writing on. That'll probably, I don't know when that's going to be announced, honestly. Sometimes it's like you do a thing and it's like, oh yeah, 2 months later, and then sometimes it's like a year and a half, 2 years later. So who knows? But I'm working on some stuff, some Japanese films. I've been writing about those a lot lately. The newest things I have out are from Arrow 444. I think I already talked about them on a previous podcast. So a lot of stuff that I'm working on that I can't talk about, sadly.
Yeah, I know the feeling because labels are funny. Some of them don't care. There are some labels, they're like, yeah, we don't care if you talk about it as long as you've turned your work in. And others are like, don't you dare. So I'm always kind of weirded out about what I should or shouldn't say. Books wise, I'm still working with Eugenio Ercolani on a project called Unsung Heroes, which is about kind of lesser known, less prolific Italian film directors who worked in popular genres like westerns and gialli and police thrillers and things like that. That will hopefully be out sometime this year. I've got my Alberto De Martino project, which is about the director of movies like Holocaust 2000 and The Antichrist and various other movies. That's in the works. Commentary wise, well, I just received the Kino release of The 10th Victim, the Elio Petri film that I did a commentary with Steve Mitchell for. I'm not listed on the back. They originally were going to have different people, so they have it wrong. They have it wrong on the back of the box, but that's okay. I am on there. That's either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on your point of view. There's a bunch that have been recorded, but that haven't been announced. I know Murder Rock, the Lucio Fulci film, they just put out the 4K from Vinegar, which uses my old commentary, but then I teamed up with Nathaniel Thompson for a new commentary for an 88 films release of the same film coming later this year. So those ones I know are out in the open. Other ones I'm not so sure.
All right, I appreciate you guys doing this, but now I got to cut you loose. I had to cut them loose. See ya.
All right, bye.
Thank you.
What do we do?
Why don't we just wait here for a little while? See what happens.
gentlemen have been through a lot. And when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this fucking couch!